The encounter. It was a typical Friday evening, and the sun was slowly dipping behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the bustling streets of the city. Judge Aaliyah Barnes, a well-respected figure in the legal community, was heading home after another long day in court. Her reputation as a fair, yet firm, judge had earned her the admiration of colleagues and the reverence of those who appeared before her. She was a force for justice, known for her unwavering commitment to equality under the law. But that evening, Aaliyah had no idea that her beliefs would be put to the test in a way she never imagined. Driving her sleek black sedan through the quiet suburban streets, her mind wandered to thoughts of her daughter Kesha, who had just returned home from college. They had plans for the weekend, and Aaliyah was eager to unwind and spend some quality time with her. However, as she passed through an intersection, the unmistakable flashing red and blue lights of a police cruiser filled her rearview mirror. Her heart skipped a beat. Aaliyah had done nothing wrong. She was meticulous when it came to obeying traffic laws. But as a black woman, she knew all too well that such situations could quickly escalate. She pulled over to the side of the road, her fingers gripping the steering wheel tighter than usual. The officer, a young man with a swagger in his step, approached her car, his hand resting casually on his holster. "Good evening, officer. Is there a problem?" Aaliyah asked, her tone firm but composed. The officer, whose Namadeg read Malister, gave her a long, scrutinizing look before demanding license and registration. Aaliyah handed over her documents without hesitation, remaining calm despite the unease building inside her. As Officer Malister examined her license, his eyes flicked upward, noticing her name and title. Judge Barnes. His tone shifted slightly, less aggressive, but still tinged with condescension. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" Aaliyah met his gaze steadily. "I'm not sure, officer. Could you enlighten me?" Malister smirked, enjoying the power dynamic. "You were speeding and didn't make a complete stop at the intersection." Aaliyah frowned. She knew she hadn't been speeding, and she always came to a full stop at intersections. However, she also knew that arguing wouldn't lead anywhere productive. "I see. I must have been distracted," she said calmly. To her surprise, Malister seemed thrown off by her composed response. Perhaps he expected anger or resistance, but Aaliyah wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. Still, the tension was palpable. His eyes roamed over her car, as if searching for something more. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered abruptly. Aaliyah's heart raced. "Is that necessary, officer?" "Step out of the vehicle, Judge. Now." Reluctantly, Aaliyah unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped out of the car, standing by the hood as instructed. She watched as Officer Malister began to search her vehicle, her thoughts racing. Was this about her being a black woman driving an expensive car, or was it something more? Minutes passed, and Malister found nothing. He returned to her, his expression unreadable. "You're free to go," he said curtly, handing her documents back. "Is that all?" Aaliyah asked, her voice still calm, but now edged with indignation. "That's all," he muttered before walking back to his cruiser. The fight for justice begins. The tension of that night had begun to fade, but the fire inside Judge Aaliyah Barnes was only just starting to blaze. As she sat in her living room, sipping a cup of herbal tea, she replayed the encounter with Officer Malister in her mind. Despite her composure, the underlying issue of systemic racism was an undeniable reality she could no longer ignore. This wasn't just about her. It was about the entire community that faced discrimination daily, people who weren't judges, people who didn't have the platform or influence she did. The weight of her role in society pressed down on her like never before. "Mom, are you okay?" Kesha asked as she entered the room, noticing her mother's distant expression. Kesha, a bright and ambitious college student, had always looked up to her mother's strength, but tonight she saw something different in Aaliyah, a vulnerability she wasn't used to. Aaliyah sighed, placing the cup of tea on the table. I'm fine, sweetie. Just thinking about everything that happened last night. Kesha sat next to her mother, her eyes full of concern. I heard what happened. That officer, what he did was wrong. You shouldn't have to go through that. No one should. Aaliyah nodded, taking her daughter's hand. You're right, Kesha. But this is bigger than just me. This is about the whole system that lets this kind of behavior happen without consequences. Kesha squeezed her mother's hand. So, what are you going to do about it? Aaliyah smiled softly at her daughter's blunt question. I've already started. I met with Marcus today, and we're filing an official complaint. But I'm not stopping there. I'm going to speak out about this. It's time people really see what's going on. Aaliyah got back into her car, her hands trembling slightly. She watched as the police car sped off, its lights still flashing. The encounter was over, but the sense of injustice lingered. This wasn't just a traffic stop. It was a painful reminder of the systemic issues she had spent her entire career fighting against. And now it was personal. As she drove home, one thought consumed her mind. This battle wasn't over. But Mom, Kesha's voice faltered. What if this gets ugly? What if people turn on you? You know how things are. People are quick to criticize. Aaliyah looked at her daughter with determination. I know, honey, but sometimes you have to stand up, no matter the cost. I didn't become a judge to stay quiet when I see something wrong. I'm doing this not just for me, but for you, for all the young black men and women who deserve better. Kesha nodded, pride swelling in her chest. She had always admired her mother's courage, but this was different. This felt bigger, more important. The next day, Aaliyah arrived at her office in the courthouse, greeted by her assistant, Carla, who handed her a stack of letters and memos. Aaliyah had become accustomed to the daily grind of courtroom life, but today, the air was heavy with anticipation. The complaint she and Marcus had filed against Officer Mallister was already making waves within the police department, and she knew it was only a matter of time before the media caught wind of it. As she sat at her desk, her phone buzzed with a notification. Aaliyah picked it up and saw a message from Marcus. Internal Affairs is reviewing the complaint. They're setting up a formal hearing for next week. Things are moving fast. She smiled, feeling a sense of satisfaction. At least someone was listening. Moments later, her office phone rang, and she answered it with her usual professionalism. Judge Barnes. Good morning, Judge Barnes. This is Detective Harris from Internal Affairs. I've been assigned to your case against Officer Mallister. Thank you for the call, Detective. I assume the department is taking this seriously? Aaliyah's tone was sharp, not out of disrespect, but out of the necessity to assert her stance. She was a judge, and this was no time for half measures. Absolutely, ma'am. We're conducting a thorough investigation. We'll be reaching out to you and Officer Mallister for formal interviews, and we'll be reviewing any body cam footage and dash cam footage from the incident. Aaliyah leaned back in her chair. I look forward to hearing your findings. As she hung up the phone, Aaliyah felt a mix of relief and apprehension. The wheels of justice were turning, but the road ahead was still unclear. Would they actually hold Officer Mallister accountable, or would this become another case swept under the rug? The following week, Aaliyah and Marcus found themselves in the sterile windowless room of the Internal Affairs office, sitting across from Detective Harris. A large television screen was mounted on the wall, where the dashcam footage of the night in question was about to be played. Aaliyah's heart raced as the video began. She could see herself driving, her car gliding smoothly down the street. Then the flash of blue lights as Officer Mallister's cruiser pulled behind her. Everything about the video confirmed what she had experienced. She watched herself, calm and composed, yet clearly being harassed by an officer whose behavior was becoming increasingly aggressive. Pause it, Aaliyah said as the video reached the moment. Mallister told her to step out of the vehicle. She looked at Detective Harris. Do you see what's happening here? There's no probable cause. This isn't just a routine stop. Detective Harris nodded slowly. We've reviewed the footage, Judge Barnes. There are Clear irregularities in the officer's conduct. This will be part of our final report. Aaliyah sat back, relieved to hear some acknowledgement, but Marcus leaned forward, his expression hard. Irregularities? This was racial profiling, plain and simple. Let's call it what it is. Detective Harris shifted in his seat. We're investigating all angles, Mr. Bennett. Rest assured, this is being taken seriously. The media soon caught wind of the internal investigation, and the story of Aaliyah Barnes, the black judge stopped by a racist cop, exploded into national headlines. News outlets from all over the country were reaching out, wanting interviews and statements. Aaliyah became a reluctant symbol in the fight for racial justice. One evening, Aaliyah and Kesha sat on the couch together, watching a news segment on the case. The reporter's voice echoed in their living room. Tonight, we examine the story of Judge Aaliyah Barnes, who alleges she was racially profiled by a white police officer during a routine traffic stop. Aaliyah turned to Kesha. I never wanted this kind of attention, you know. I just wanted to do my job and go home. But now, Kesha placed a hand on her mother's arm. Now you're making a difference, Mom. You're standing up for all of us. Aaliyah smiled, though the weight of it all was exhausting. I hope so, Kesha. I really do. As the investigation progressed, Aaliyah found herself constantly in meetings, interviews, and consultations with civil rights attorneys. Her resolve never wavered, but the strain was becoming palpable. Despite the support from Marcus, Kesha, and her community, Aaliyah knew this was an uphill battle. But she was not alone. Her case had ignited a spark across the country, with other individuals coming forward to share their own stories of racial profiling. Suddenly, what had started as one judge's fight for justice was growing into a nationwide movement for change. And Aaliyah, whether she liked it or not, was at the forefront of it all. The battle escalates. The media storm surrounding Aaliyah's case intensified, with her name becoming synonymous with the fight against racial injustice. Headlines splashed across major news outlets read, Black Judge Fights Back Against Racial Profiling, and Judge Barnes Takes on Systemic Racism. Aaliyah had never sought this kind of attention, but now that it was here, she realized it was a moment she couldn't afford to waste. At the courthouse, her life had changed drastically. What was once a place where she was respected as Judge Barnes now felt different. Colleagues greeted her with a mix of admiration and discomfort, unsure of how to engage with her in the wake of the controversy. Aaliyah had become more than a judge. She was now a symbol, and symbols came with weight. One afternoon, as she prepared for court, she received an unexpected call from someone in the mayor's office. It wasn't a call for a statement or to offer support. Instead, it was a request to meet with the mayor personally. As she entered the grandiose mayoral office later that day, the tension was palpable. Mayor Richard Campbell, a seasoned politician with a reputation for maintaining the city's polished image, greeted her with a forced smile. Judge Barnes, thank you for coming on such short notice, the mayor said, gesturing for her to sit. Aaliyah, always poised, took a seat, but kept her guard up. She could sense there was more to this meeting than a mere discussion. Of course, Mayor Campbell, how can I help you? The mayor leaned forward, his eyes narrowing slightly. I'll get straight to the point, Judge. Your case against Officer Mallister is making headlines, and it's becoming a bit of a political issue. I'm sure you understand the position this puts the city in. Aaliyah's brow furrowed. And what position would that be, exactly? The mayor cleared his throat. While I fully support your right to seek justice, I'm concerned that the narrative is spiraling out of control. We're receiving pressure from several influential parties, law enforcement unions, business leaders, who feel this could harm the city's reputation. What I'm asking is simple. Would you consider quietly settling this matter? We can ensure a favorable outcome for you, and you'll be compensated for your troubles. All we need is for the noise to die down. Aaliyah's heart pounded in her chest. It was an all-too-familiar scenario. Powerful people asking those fighting for justice to stay quiet, to take a settlement, and let the system continue unchecked. She had worked her entire career to ensure fairness, yet now she was being asked to compromise everything she stood for. Her voice was steady but firm. "Mayor Campbell, this isn't about money or reputation. This is about justice. Officer Mallister's actions were wrong, and I won't be silenced just to preserve the city's image." The mayor's expression hardened. "I understand, Judge, but you should consider the potential fallout. This could damage your career, your reputation." Alia interrupted him, her eyes blazing with determination. "I'm not concerned with my reputation. I'm concerned with what's right." One evening, as Alia sat at her kitchen table, Kesha entered the room, holding her phone. Her face lit up with excitement. "Mom, you have to see this." Alia looked up from her laptop, exhausted but curious. "What is it?" Kesha handed her the phone, where a video clip of a prominent civil rights leader, Reverend Charles Jackson, was playing. He was standing on the steps of the Capitol building, addressing a massive crowd. "And I stand here today not just in support of Judge Alia Barnes, but in support of every black man, woman, and child who has ever been wrongfully profiled, harassed, or humiliated. This fight is not just hers, it's ours. And together, we will change this system." Alia felt a lump form in her throat as she watched the video. Reverend Jackson was a towering figure in the fight for racial equality, and his endorsement meant everything. It wasn't just her small community anymore. This had grown into a national movement. As the video ended, Kesha's eyes were alight with hope. "Mom, this is huge. Reverend Jackson is with us. This changes everything." Alia nodded, her emotions a mix of gratitude and disbelief. "I never thought this would reach so far. I just wanted to get justice for what happened to me. But now it feels like we're fighting for something much bigger." Kesha smiled. "We are, and people are starting to listen." Days turned into weeks, and the momentum didn't slow down. More rallies were organized, not just in Alia's city, but across the country. Each one grew larger than the last, drawing people of all races, backgrounds, and ages together in a united demand for justice and change. Celebrities began lending their voices to the cause, amplifying the message further. But with the increased attention came new challenges. Behind closed doors, Alia's case against Officer Mallister was heating up. The police union was fighting back, launching a smear campaign aimed at discrediting her. Stories appeared in the tabloids questioning her integrity, her history, even her qualifications as a judge. Some accused her of using the incident for fame or personal gain. One evening, Marcus called her in a tone more serious than usual. "Alia, we need to talk." She immediately sensed the urgency in his voice. "What is it, Marcus?" "There's a new development. The police department has filed a countersuit. They're claiming defamation and are accusing you of slander. They're saying your public statements have damaged the reputation of the department." Alia's stomach dropped. "Are you serious? After everything that's happened, they're going to try to flip this on me." Marcus sighed. "It's a classic tactic. They're trying to scare you into dropping the case. They want to paint you as the villain." Alia's hands shook as she gripped the phone. "What are my options?" "We fight back," Marcus said firmly. "But it's going to get ugly. They'll dig into your past, your personal life, everything. They're hoping to break you, to make you give up. But if we stay the course, we can still win this." Alia took a deep breath, letting Marcus's words sink in. She had known this fight wouldn't be easy, but she hadn't anticipated just how far the opposition would go to protect their own. Still, as daunting as it was, she knew she couldn't back down. "I'm not giving up," she said quietly, but with conviction. "We fight." The days that followed were grueling. Alia faced relentless attacks in the media, with news outlets running sensationalized stories designed to tarnish her character. But through it all, she remained unwavering, her focus sharpened by the adversity. One day, while preparing for a critical court hearing, Kesha burst into the room, holding up her phone again. "Mom, you need to see this." Alia's heart sank for a moment, She was used to bad news by now. "What now?" she asked, bracing herself. Kesha handed her the phone, where a video was playing. It was footage from a police body camera. The footage showed Officer Mallister's initial encounter with Aaliyah, unedited and raw. As Aaliyah watched, her eyes widened in shock. The video clearly showed Officer Mallister stopping her without cause, making racially charged remarks, and dismissing her attempts to explain who she was. But the most damning part of the video came at the end, where another officer could be heard telling Mallister, "You sure you want to mess with a judge? This could blow up in our faces." Kesha was grinning ear to ear. "Someone leaked the footage, Mom. It's all over the internet. The truth is out." Aaliyah felt a wave of relief wash over her. This was it. This was the proof they needed. This changes everything. The leaked footage spread like wildfire. Within hours, it had been picked up by every major news network. The public, once divided on the issue, now had irrefutable evidence of Officer Mallister's misconduct. The police department was thrown into disarray, scrambling to contain the fallout. The countersuit against Aaliyah was dropped within days, and the police department issued a formal apology. Officer Mallister was placed on unpaid leave pending further investigation, and there were whispers that other officers might be implicated in a broader scandal. But for Aaliyah, the victory was bittersweet. While she had fought tirelessly for this moment, she knew that this one victory wasn't enough to fix the broken system. It was a step in the right direction, but the fight was far from over. One evening, after the dust had settled, Aaliyah sat on her porch with Kesha. The air was cool, and the sound of distant traffic hummed in the background. Kesha broke the silence. "So, what's next?" Aaliyah smiled softly, gazing out at the horizon. "There's still so much work to do. This victory is important, but it's just the beginning. I want to keep pushing for change. Real, lasting change." Kesha nodded. "You've already made such a difference, Mom. People are listening. They're inspired." Aaliyah chuckled. "I didn't set out to inspire anyone. I just wanted justice." "Maybe that's why you've inspired so many," Kesha said, her voice filled with admiration. Aaliyah looked at her daughter, feeling a deep sense of pride. "I guess we'll just have to see where this journey takes us next." As they sat together, watching the sky turn from dusk to night, Aaliyah knew one thing for certain. The fight for justice might be long and hard, but with people like Kesha and others by her side, she was ready for whatever came next. The ripple effect. Weeks after the footage went viral, Aaliyah's life had become a blur of interviews, meetings, and court appearances. What had started as a personal quest for justice had evolved into a much larger movement. Aaliyah had unintentionally become the face of a national conversation about systemic racism, police accountability, and the struggle for equality. Every step she took now echoed across the country. Despite the mounting pressure, Aaliyah remained focused. Her schedule was relentless, but her purpose had never been clearer. And though the police department's smear campaign had fizzled in the face of the bodycam footage, new challenges arose. Calls flooded in from people facing similar experiences, some asking for legal advice, others sharing stories of racial profiling, police harassment, and discrimination. The flood of voices demanding justice weighed heavily on her shoulders. One afternoon, she sat in her home office, trying to catch her breath. The stress was overwhelming. Just as she leaned back in her chair, her phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. She glanced at the screen. "Big news. Call me ASAP." Curious, Aaliyah dialed him immediately. "What's going on, Marcus?" Marcus's voice was buzzing with excitement. "Aaliyah, you won't believe it. We've been approached by the Department of Justice. They're launching a federal investigation into the police department, specifically targeting racial profiling and misconduct. Your case was the tipping point." Aaliyah's eyes widened in shock. "The Department of Justice. I never imagined it would go this far." "They want to meet with you," Marcus continued. "Your story is going to help shake the investigation. This isn't just about Officer Mallister anymore. This is about changing the entire system." For a moment, Alia was speechless. The weight of it all began to sink in. What had started as a humiliating encounter with a rogue police officer had spiraled into something much more significant. Her fight for justice was now a catalyst for national reform. Later that evening, Alia sat with her daughter, Kesha, trying to process everything. They had been through so much together, and now it felt as though the world was watching their every move. "Mom, this is huge," Kesha said, eyes wide with admiration. "You're not just changing laws, you're changing lives." Alia sighed, the gravity of the situation pressing on her. "It feels so surreal, Kesha. I never asked for this spotlight. I just wanted to make sure that no one else would go through what I did." Kesha nodded, her voice steady. "But that's exactly why it happened. People trust you because you're not doing this for fame or attention. You're doing it because it's right." As much as Alia tried to maintain her composure, the enormity of it all began to sink in. She had spent her entire career upholding the law, and now she was at the forefront of changing it. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for future generations. The task seemed monumental, but for the first time, Alia felt like she wasn't alone. The days that followed were filled with preparations for Alia's meeting with the Department of Justice. When the day finally arrived, she was escorted to the federal building, where she met with several top officials who were leading the investigation. Sitting across from them, Alia shared her story in vivid detail, from the moment Officer Mallister pulled her over to the rallies that had since taken over the country. The officials listened intently, taking notes and asking pointed questions. By the end of the meeting, they made it clear that Alia's case would be a central focus in their investigation. It was the beginning of a massive federal probe that could lead to sweeping changes in how police departments across the nation operated. As Alia left the building, a feeling of cautious optimism washed over her. She had always believed in justice, but this was the first time she felt like it was truly within reach. Despite the progress, not everyone welcomed the change. The backlash from some parts of society grew louder, with conservative pundits claiming that the investigation was anti-police and un-American. Alia received hateful messages, with some calling her a traitor and accusing her of vilifying law enforcement. She knew this was inevitable. The fight for justice was never easy, and it often came with its share of enemies. One evening, while watching the news, Alia saw a segment covering a protest held by a local police union. Officers marched with signs that read, "We stand with Mallister," and support the Thin Blue Line. The news anchor reported that many police officers were feeling demoralized, claiming that the investigation had gone too far. Kesha, sitting beside Alia, frowned at the TV. "It's like they don't even care about what actually happened. They're just protecting their own, no matter what." Alia nodded, her eyes fixed on the screen. "It's hard for people to accept change, Kesha, but we can't let that stop us." A few weeks later, Alia found herself standing on a stage, microphone in hand, in front of thousands of supporters. It was the largest rally yet, with people from all over the country gathered to demand justice and police reform. Standing beside her were other victims of police misconduct, their voices finally being heard. Alia took a deep breath, looking out at the sea of faces, people of all races, backgrounds, and ages, united in their demand for change. She had never considered herself a public speaker, but the weight of this moment compelled her to speak from the heart. "I never asked for any of this," Alia began, her voice steady. "I didn't set out to become a symbol or to lead a movement. All I wanted was justice for myself and my family. But what I've learned is that my story is just one of many. Too many people have been silenced. Too many lives have been ruined by the very system that's supposed to protect us." The crowd erupted in applause, and Alia paused, letting the moment sink in. "But this isn't just about me," she continued. "This is about all of us, about making sure that no one else has to experience what I did. It's about changing a system that has failed too many people for too long, and we won't stop until that change comes." The cheers were deafening, And Aliyah felt a surge of emotion as she looked out at the crowd. This was no longer just her fight. This was a movement, and it was growing stronger every day. As the rally continued, Aliyah felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to see a young man, no older than 20, with tears in his eyes. "Judge Barnes," he said softly, "I just wanted to thank you. My brother was killed by the police last year, and seeing you stand up to them, it gives me hope. It makes me believe that things can get better." Aliyah felt a lump form in her throat. She placed a hand on the young man's shoulder, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm so sorry for your loss, and I promise you, we're going to keep fighting until there's justice for everyone." As the young man walked away, Aliyah stood there, taking in the gravity of his words. This fight was no longer just about her. It was about all the people who had been wronged, all the lives that had been shattered by injustice. And though the road ahead was long and filled with obstacles, Aliyah knew one thing for certain. She was ready for whatever came next. A new dawn. Months had passed since Aliyah first took the stand in the battle against Officer Mallister and the corrupt system that had enabled him. The investigation by the Department of Justice was in full swing, uncovering deep-seated issues of racial profiling and misconduct within police departments nationwide. While the tide was shifting, the fight was far from over. For Aliyah, life had transformed in ways she had never imagined. She had gone from being a well-respected but relatively private judge to an outspoken advocate for reform. The media attention was overwhelming, and every word she said, every action she took, was scrutinized. But despite the pressure, Aliyah felt an unshakable resolve to see this through to the end. One crisp morning, Aliyah woke up to a notification on her phone. It was a news alert. Her breath caught in her throat as she read the headline. "Federal Court Sets Precedent in Racial Profiling Case. Judge Barnes Leads Landmark Victory." The article detailed how, for the first time in history, a police department had been found guilty of systemic racial discrimination in a federal court. Officer Mallister, the man who had humiliated Aliyah that fateful day, was stripped of his badge and faced criminal charges. The court ruling was hailed as a landmark victory, a beacon of hope for countless victims of racial injustice across the nation. Aliyah stared at the screen, her heart racing. The news felt surreal. She had been fighting for this moment for so long, but now that it was here, she didn't know how to process it. Suddenly, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was Marcus. "Aliyah." His voice was filled with excitement. "Did you see the news? We won. It's over." Aliyah blinked, still trying to comprehend it all. "I can't believe it," she whispered. "We actually did it." "We did more than just win," Marcus continued. "This ruling is going to change everything. Other police departments are going to be held accountable now. This is just the beginning." Later that day, Aliyah found herself walking into the courthouse where the final ruling had been made. A crowd had gathered outside, reporters, activists, and supporters all clamoring to see the woman who had sparked this monumental change. As she stepped out of her car, the crowd erupted into applause. "Thank you, Judge Barnes." Someone shouted, "You're a hero." Aliyah smiled humbly and waved at the crowd. She didn't feel like a hero. She was just someone who had done what needed to be done. But in that moment, she realized that this victory wasn't just hers. It belonged to every person who had been wronged by the system, every voice that had gone unheard for so long. That evening, Aliyah sat on the balcony of her home, watching the sunset with Kesha. It was a rare moment of peace in what had been a whirlwind of chaos and change. "Mom," Kesha began, "do you realize what you've done? You've changed the world." Aliyah shook her head, still not fully grasping the enormity of it all. "I just did what was right, Kesha. That's all." Kesha smiled, her eyes filled with admiration. "But sometimes, doing what's right is the hardest thing in the world. And you did it. You didn't back down, even when things got tough." Aliyah's mind wandered back to the beginning of this journey, to the moment Officer Mallister had pulled her over and treated her like a criminal in her own car. She thought about all the times she had considered giving up, all the nights she had spent wondering if this fight was worth it. But now, sitting here with her daughter, knowing that her actions had sparked real change, Alia knew that it had all been worth it. The days following the court ruling were a whirlwind. Alia was invited to speak at events across the country, her voice becoming a symbol of hope and resilience. She met with other victims of police brutality and racial discrimination, offering them encouragement and guidance. The federal investigation continued to expand, with other police departments now under scrutiny for their practices. But while the victory was sweet, Alia knew the fight wasn't over. Systemic change took time, and there were still those who resisted the movement. Some politicians and law enforcement officials continued to push back, framing the reforms as anti-police and dangerous. Threats and hateful messages still filled Alia's inbox, but she had learned to push past the noise. One day, as she was preparing for another rally, Marcus called with unexpected news. "Alia, I just got off the phone with the mayor's office," he said, his voice serious. Alia raised an eyebrow. "What's going on?" "They want you to run for city council," Marcus revealed. "They believe you'd be the perfect candidate to lead the city through these reforms." Alia froze. The idea of entering politics had never crossed her mind. She was a judge, not a politician. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that this might be the next logical step in her journey. "I don't know, Marcus," she said slowly. "I'm not sure I'm cut out for politics." Marcus chuckled. "You've already been leading a movement, Alia. Politics is just another way to make sure the changes we're fighting for actually happen."